introduce, I'm James Raines, the Director of Adult Studies here at Crossroads College. We're going to go ahead and start by opening the word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the beautiful music that we heard, the words of worship that were contained in. Lord, like Jonas, I have ran from you the last 2 weeks in reference to this message. I have done everything in my power to avoid it. I have done everything to seek to find a new message to preach because it's a hard message, Lord, and it's one that's very personal to me. And Lord, we know that when you are personable, there is that chance of rejection, fear, anger. So Lord, I pray now as you have continued to bring me back to this message, I pray now that you give me the words to say. And I pray for everyone here that there is something that you want to speak to them, that you would, that they would be receptive to that. In Christ's name I pray. All right, so I want to start with you today by talking about Burj Khalifa. Now when you hear Burj Khalifa, many of you might think, that's a strange name. But that is the name of a place, not a person. Burj Khalifa is the tallest building in the world. It stands far above the clouds at 2,717 feet. Nearly half a mile high. It's twice as tall as the Empire State Building in New York. It contains 211 floors, has 58 elevators, and it took nearly 12,000 people over a period of 6 years to complete it. It is a modern marvel that far surpasses anything we've ever created. In comparison, the Great Pyramid, one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world, barely stands above the base of this building. In fact, it is so tall that if you were to open a door on the top floor and a door on the bottom floor, that if it was not for the pressurized airlocks in the middle of the building, it would create an atmospheric storm with lightning and rain on the inside of the building that would be so intense it would literally tear the building apart. Despite the sheer wonder of this creation, it pales in comparison to the beauty of the soul, which God himself breathed into the nostrils of man, making him a living creature. Its beauty is not nearly to be compared to the human body that we know from Psalms that God formed the inward parts of, that he knit it together as we lay in our mother's womb. And then he tells us we are fearfully and wonderfully made. But how much more beauty than even the human body and the human soul is found in God's redemptive plan. We see that he created us, but we rebelled against him. We see that even after this rebellion, he chose to give up his own son that we might be saved. How beautiful it is to see a person transformed by the power of this simple gift. It reminds me of a young boy, a boy who contained this wonderful soul, a boy who was fearfully and wonderfully made, but who was born into a cruel world, who because of the color of his skin faced racial disparage. He was beaten and broken by those around him because of hatred. Even his home life was no shelter, as there lived a man there who fueled his rage with a bottle. He called this man Father. This boy would grow into a young man. By the time, I'm going to shut this one. By the time he was in 3rd grade, he had faced 2 concussions that would cause a lifetime of neurological disorders. He would face internal bleeding by the age of a 4th grader. By the time he was a young man, he had had multiple ribs broken and his nose broken so many times that they had to set it and do surgery. This boy is a man who is filled with conflicting emotions and thoughts. He is both angry and defeated. He is both excited yet filled with sorrow. He is strong, but he is broken. The young man, like most, is searching for something anything. He just doesn't know what that is. Maybe some of you can relate to this. You have been born into a world of suffering, pain. You have felt the hate of others because of differences. You too have been a person who is filled with these deep-rooted emotions and thoughts that are set in a furious cycle of opposition. There's a group of people who come to this young man's life, a group of people who have one mind and one voice to accomplish a great task. They seek to minister to young people who are hurting, who have come from broken homes and broken places. With one mind and one voice, they unite to share the gospel with these young people. And on one night, this young man happens across these individuals and is able to hear the gospel. After hearing the gospel, he submits himself to it. He's asked the Lord to save him, and the Lord does. Again, like this young man, all of you today can relate to this gospel story. You can relate to the joy of this salvation, and you have chosen to submit your lives to the Lord, and you have clung to his feet like small children. But this is not the end of this young man's story or yours, and is merely the beginning. I submit to you that with one mind and one voice, there is nothing we can't accomplish. But if we are not careful, if we do not guard our hearts and our minds, we can fall into the trap of sin and watch all the works we've accomplished fall apart. Our passage today is in Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9. Genesis chapter 11, 1 through 9. I'll read it to us, you can follow along. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, Come, let us make bricks, and bake them thoroughly. They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad the face of the earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, Indeed, the people are one, and they have one language. And that what is it is that they have begun to do, now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the entire earth. And they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord scattered them abroad on the face of the earth. We see here in Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9, how we can accomplish a great work. But it also provides a warning to prevent us from falling into a snare. So I would like to give you some points today. And the first one is a great work can sometimes follow the heels of a great calamity. As it has been said, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. We see this great calamity in Genesis chapter 6. Most of us know it as the flood chapter. And despite your theology, despite your doctrine, whether you believe demons mated with women, or demon-possessed men mated with women, or even godly men mated with ungodly women, the point is that God looks down in Genesis chapter 6, and he sees that the hearts of men and women and their thoughts and the intent behind their emotions is evil, and that it is continually evil, and it is deeply rooted. And then we get to see the emotions of our God as it grieved his heart to see what had happened. And he decides to do something utterly terrible and to destroy all that he had created, both man and beast. But then we see that Noah finds grace in the eyes of the Lord. The great flood comes upon the earth, as we know, and Noah and his family are saved from a watery grave. Noah is allowed to be the agent of restoration between God and man. And we see him going out with his family to be fruitful and to multiply. Like Noah, the young man who we just talked about was saved by the grace of the Lord, saved from the calamity that was his life, and set to a new task and a new life, to be fruitful in the efforts of the gospel, and to be used as an agent to give the word to those who are desperately in need, so that God's kingdom is multiplied. And then the next two chapters we see a genealogy of Noah
as his family begins to be fruitful and to multiply. But God allows Genesis chapter 11 to interrupt this genealogy, to give us an illustration and a warning. A professor of mine once said, much like our Dr. Sprinkle, that if there's an interruption in genealogy, you need to pay attention because it's important. And now we see the story of the Tower of Babel. We have heard this story again and again. If you have grown up in the church, you would have heard this in children's stories over and over again. You would have heard it in youth group again and again. It has become so repetitious in our lives that it's almost like a VeggieTales cartoon. But today I hope to give you a little bit different opinion, a little bit different look at this familiar story. So hopefully we can see from the main characters of it the dangers. And I hope that we can understand and take heed of the warning. The second thing I would like to talk about is a great work is accomplished when people have a unified vision. In Genesis 11:1, we see that they have come together to do a great work. Can you see these men and women? Can you imagine them as they discuss the plans to build the greatest thing on the earth that has ever been seen or known? They are not fighting, they are not arguing. They have their minds and their hearts focused on doing something that had never been done before. As the old cliche says, they had their eye on the prize. I would like to contrast this to current churches, and to often say that even current churches sometimes lack the unity needed to do God's work. Some of you might be doubting me when I make a comment like that, but I would suggest to you that if you are doubting, to sit in your church's next building project, and you will see this disunity. I will never forget a time growing up in rural America in a farmland community. There was a local church that I happened to be a part of, a church that had $8 million in the bank. 4 generations of people would pass, rich farmers, they would pass, and they would give their land to this church. The church would then sell the land at farm prices and then invest it. $8 million in a church of a congregation about this size. But they hoarded their money. They kept it for themselves. They got a new youth pastor who said, we have all this money. There's a need for our youth. There's not a good gym in our town. Let's build a gym so we can reach out to a community that thinks we're evil and closed off and mean and spiteful. So for 2 years, the people argued back and forth about whether or not to build this building. And then after the end of the 2 years, there was another year of the building progress, and it was finally complete. But the greatest fight, the greatest argument occurred almost a year after the building had been built. It was being used. People were getting saved. But the fight was not yet done. They determined that they had to keep code, to tear out some bathrooms in the back vestibule. Just a big fancy word for the back. Where they had 2 bathrooms. They had to tear them out and put in a handicap ramp. Something that is nonsense in the sense of we should have a handicap ramp at our church so we can minister to the elderly who want to come but can't come to a church where there's 15 steps. And I'll never forget sitting in the back pew to describe 2 of the characters from the story. One character, a veteran of the Korean War, retired out of the military, served during the time of the Cold War. The other player, a quiet, shy, young teenage girl. And I'll never forget, as they were arguing about tearing down this bathroom, this muscular, elderly farmer stood up and he said, "We are not going to tear down those walls. I built them with my bare hands almost 3 decades ago." I'll never forget this little petite lady stood up, shy, maybe said 1 or 2 words the whole time I knew her. And she stood up and she pointed at this man in the middle of the church service. She said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall." Now, some of you might know that that's referring to Ronald Reagan's speech to Mikhail Gorbachev, a speech that would symbolize the end of the Cold War. Now, that might not mean as much to you as it does to me, but you can imagine a veteran of the Korean War who served during that time to have that tossed in his face. It destroyed that relationship. And to this day, it has never been ended. But these people were not like that. They were of one mind and one voice. I take you back to the young man. His life has made a 180-degree turn. He is a new person. He has a new vision. He is going to go to Bible college. He is going to study the word of his master. He is going to help those who, like him, needed the Lord desperately. I know there are people here right now who can relate to this. You have begun a great work. You have a vision. And now you are here at Crossroads College to make that vision a reality. But not only does great work need a unified vision, it needs the best supplies. In Genesis chapter 11, verse 3, we see them making their supplies. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for work. And this is very interesting, that the fact that they even mentioned this. Why is this in here? This is the first time in the Old Testament that you will see that people are using brick and mortar to build. Can you see them there? Planning this. They've determined the building plans. Can you see the one guy who's standing there going, "No, let's use trees and mud, like before, like we've always done"? No. They're going to use the best supplies because they want this to be the greatest building that has ever been built. This point is stated over and over in the Bible. For example, we are told to use costly stones to lay up the foundation of a house. We see that the best materials were used in building the tabernacle and the temple. We know in the New Testament that Christ is described as the living stone, the chief cornerstone, and the rock. And we know that Jesus himself gives us an illustration of the wise man who builds his house on a rock and the fool who builds it upon sand. It reminds me of a childhood story. When I was 8 years old, I got the brilliant idea that I was going to build the most epic tree house that had ever been created in my lifetime. So I got my materials together, which consisted of rusted nails, rotted wood, and I began to construct the most epic tree house ever. With no help, no instruction, and no guidance. I remember once it was complete, I climbed up the tree because I didn't know how to build a ladder, and I stood on my creation, and I could see the whole world from an 8th grader's point of view on that creation. And as I stood there, I kind of, I had that 8th grader stance, kind of that, I've done the greatest thing ever. I started to hear the sound of leaves rattling, but there was no wind. And I heard the sound of ice cracking, but it was summer. And there I went, straight down through the bottom of that rusted wood. I remember dusting myself off because when you're 8 years old, you're made of rubber, and you can take a good fall and just bounce right back. And when I stood up, something was different. Something was new. I had a piece of wood, rotten wood, sticking to my knee. I don't know why it was sticking there, but it was. So I pulled it out. I mean, what else are you going to do? I mean, I just pulled it out. Can you imagine now, if you would, taking a milk carton that's full of milk and poking a hole in the bottom of that milk? What happens? The milk comes out. Now imagine that except for a creamy, yummy substance of milk, there's a crimson substance. And as I look down and I see it in shock, not realizing what's happening, and I look down at the piece of wood, there sticking out of the piece of wood is a rusted nail. So not only did I fail in making my treehouse, I had to spend the rest of the day in the emergency room. And if you think the rusted nail through the knee was bad, if any of you can remember your tetanus booster, I can assure you that was far worse. You have to use the best materials, the best supplies. I take you from this humorous story back to the young man. He has become wiser in years. He is married. He's involved in youth work. He is building a foundation for a great work in ministry. He has reconciled with his abusive father. He has nearly finished his time at Bible college. He has used the best materials to begin the greatest work of his life. Maybe some of you can relate to him. Some of you are almost done as well. Graduation is quickly approaching. So not only does a great work need the best materials, a great work has a potential of lasting a long time. And because of this, my next point is, a great work often creates a lasting heritage. We see that in Genesis 11, in the last part of verse 4. It says, "Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad the face of the whole earth." Like most people, these people wanted to create a lasting heritage. They did not want their name to be forgotten. It reminds me of a story when I was a freshman in Bible college in 2001. I remember a time when I got one of the sternest lectures of my entire life. And all it was a simple phrase told to me by an elderly and godly man. And he said to me, "Is this the kind of heritage? Is this the kind of heritage you wish to leave these young students?" Now, at the time, being a student, I didn't understand the idea of recruitment. I didn't understand how important recruitment is to a college. I did not understand, as Todd Looney could probably tell you, how important it is to get students on your campus and to help them see the benefits of an education that is centered on Christ. I was just a young, dumb Bible college student. And like most young, foolish Bible college students, I had done something stupid. A big youth rally had been put on by the college. There were students from all over Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. We had 200 students on campus for this massive youth rally. They were staying in the dorms. Now, the only problem was that they had a reputation of taking a billiard or two from the pool table in the men's dorm. Or maybe breaking a pool on accident. So we already had a negative view of these people before they even came on campus. And I remember we had just done a skit. So if you can imagine this, 4 men dressed in jeans, white undershirts, wearing crazy clown-like wigs. We truly looked like deranged clowns escaped from a local circus. And to make matters worse, we had large leather belts in our hand. Now, as most of you can relate, when you are a college student, you are constantly hungry. I don't know about you, but I was constantly hungry. And part of the prize for doing this skit was to get pizza. He knows. Pizza is amazing as a college student. You can eat pizza and ramen noodles all day long, every day, for all eternity. So our pizza, which was our prize for doing this skit and dressing just ridiculous, went missing. And so, of course, we were susceptible to believe things like those kids took them. And I never forget, we walked up to the 4th floor where all the kids were staying in our dorms, wearing our crazy outfits with our belts. And we grabbed some poor kid. Never do this in recruitment. This is absolutely a horrible thing to do. They probably thought it was the coolest thing ever. But we grabbed some kid and we said, "Tell us where the pizza is!" And of course he did. I mean, 4 guys dressed like clowns asked you where the pizza is. You're going to tell them. He said, "Room 415. So we go marching over to room 415. And it's kind of strange because everything's abuzz with all these kids. Everything's alive. Except room 415, the lights are off. It's kind of strange. Now, during this time, something called the Lord of the Rings was popular. And we were kind of all on a Lord of the Rings kick. And I'll never forget, I felt like Aragorn in Lord of the Rings. I had that belt held high. And as we stormed into that room, I could almost hear myself saying, "One ring to rule them all." And we busted in that room, and I was a mixture of John Wayne in a Western and Indiana Jones and Temple of the Doom. And then lights came on. And it was not students. It was not even youth pastors. As Todd Looney could say that, we might have gotten away. We might have gotten a pass. No, it was the senior pastors The elderly pastors who had driven to the conference to hear it, but not necessarily with the youth group. These men were in their 60s and 70s. And I'll never forget the elderly man who spoke those words to me. As he spoke them to me, a red belt welt was appearing on his face. And he said to me, "Is this the legacy? Is this the legacy you want to leave to these students?" And it wasn't. We never desire our heritage to be evil or wicked. Most of us want our names to be remembered for our great works and our good deeds. I take you back to the young man. He's doing very well. He has risen above most of his students in his classes because of his grasp of theology and his understanding of doctrine. He is doing extremely well in youth ministries. Many have told him his preaching is life-changing, and that the Lord has gifted him tremendously in both music and his ability to minister to others. He is filled with pride of his accomplishments, and he is starting to spend every waking moment enveloped in his ministry and in his schoolwork. He wants to leave a lasting mark. There are some people that are sitting among you right now who can relate to this. You want to leave a lasting mark. But lastly, a great work that comes from the heels of calamity, envisioned with a spirit of unity, and built with the best supply, even one that creates a lasting heritage, can and will fail if the heart is not right. And now we see the pride of the people. In the first part of verse 4, you see these unified visionaries with the best supplies, hoping to create a lasting heritage, succumb to pride. And it's something very simple. It's just a very simple phrase. It said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens." They desire to create a tower whose top were in the heavens. Now, if you could imagine being these people, and it's hard because we have airplanes, we have machinery, but you can imagine these people. To them, the sky was it. Above the sky was the gods. They sought to build a tower that reached up into that forbidden area. In verse 5, you see that the plans are disrupted. Their work is halted. The heritage is about to change. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, "Indeed, the people are one. They have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now, nothing they propose will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down there and use their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." What they had done in pride to create a lasting legacy so they would not be scattered over the earth, the Lord undid and confounded their language and did the opposite of what their desire was, and he cast them to the four corners of the earth, dispersing them because of their sin. The young man is not young anymore, and in 1 week the Lord destroys all that he has built. His father, of which he has reconciled, has a stroke. His wife, tired of the fact that she feels that his love of ministry is more than his love for her, leaves him for the comfort of another man. His college, in his last part of his senior year, asks him to leave because they don't accept, condone, or fellowship with people who are separated or divorced. And his youth work is taken from him because he is told to take time and to work on his marriage, a marriage that will never be healed. He is utterly broken and abandoned. He is told by a close pastor friend in his religious circles he will never, ever be a pastor. He will never be an elder. He will never be a deacon. And it would be an act of God for him to be a missionary. And that his best course of action would be to forget ministry altogether and to find a different occupation. If you do not guard your hearts and your minds against the subtle bite of pride, the Lord will not be pleased with your work. Because the Lord's greatest desire is to have a relationship with you, a healthy, active relationship. And if anything hinders that, including ministry, he will take that, because his desire is for relationship. Maybe some of you can relate to this person. Maybe there is somebody here right now who is feeling convicted. They're feeling that small tug of the Holy Spirit on their heartstrings. Maybe some of you are wanting, wishing to go back to your first love, your simple love that is not bogged down with the sin of pride. The beauty of this message concludes with this. With one heart and one mind, we can accomplish anything. We know that great works usually follow traumatic events. We can see a great work uses the best materials, and it leaves a long-lasting legacy. And we have seen the danger of pride. However, there is hope. The reason why I chose this passage is because it helps us to see a cycle. We allow sin to destroy our relationships, to destroy our good works. And God destroys what sin builds. But then he restores us. This will not be the first time that God disperses his people. There are several occasions where God will disperse his own people because of their sin. As I prayed this last month about what to speak on in chapel, I thought to myself, what is the most important thing that I personally needed to hear when I went to a Christian college? What was something that I missed? What was something that went past the radar? What was something that I desperately needed knowledge of, but nobody told me? And it was this message. Because that young boy, that young man, that not so young man from the story is the very man who stands before you today. And I assure you, wholeheartedly, with everything that is in me, that pride will destroy your future ministry. But because I am standing before you, I can tell you that there is restoration. And I leave you with this. As we accomplish great things as Christians, if we have one mind and one voice, we use the best materials. And I know that great works leave a lasting heritage. But if you are allowing pride to drive your desire to be in ministry, be wary. As this is one of the most dangerous things you can ever do. Guard your hearts, and if pride is already there, call it out, expose it for what it is, and ask the Lord for forgiveness, repent from it. And the last thing I want to leave with you, the most important thing, is if you are struggling with pride, if you are, when you think of ministry, not thinking, Lord, how may I glorify you? Lord, how may I help your kingdom? And you are thinking, what can I do to make an impression? I would say that that root of pride might already be there. And I would suggest to you that you find out, you seek out a spiritual mentor in your life. Somebody you know is wise. Somebody you know has been there. And ask and seek their help.